So let's talk about neuronal cells. Okay, let's think about neurons. And you need to reach across an axon, right? You have the nucleus somewhere. I never remember, so neuron cell, something which looks like this. And you have the nucleus somewhere, and you're producing, and let's say you have a protein, and you want it to reach from one side to the other. What would be the size of the axon?
1 meter?
It's the longest.
Yeah, so it could be 1 meter for the longest. But let's say, let's not go that far. Let's just go for something, that you probably have already in your brain. Let's say this is 1 centimeter. Okay? How long does it take a protein to reach across 1 centimeter axon by diffusion?
It's not really.
Okay, so the question, would it take 1 minute, 1 hour, 1 day, 10 days? Who's voting for 1 minute? A few. Who's voting for 1 hour? A few. Who's voting for 1 day? A few. Who's voting for 10 days? Okay, nobody wants. Okay, so we have 4 people for each answer, and half of the people are abstained. So what would dictate the rate at which things would move in bacteria, or by diffusion? Sorry.
Density,
Temperature.
Okay, so let's write that down. So we have the density, we have the temperature, the size of the protein,
Concentration gradient.
concentration gradient,
the size.
Yeah,
The protein.
Okay, so there's all sorts of stuff. And there's an elegant way to get out of all this mess. And that is to just think about the distance that you're covering as a function of the time that elapses. And all of the rest of the stuff, to just call it D. Okay, so you just bundle it up, all the dependencies on temperature and density and the size. Session guide is something else. Let's not talk about it now. If you want, it's a bit non-intuitive. So there's also, by the way, for some historical reason, it's different if you do it in 1 dimensions or in 2 dimensions or in 3 dimensions. And because of that, there's also a factor of 6. Some odd fact. Well, yeah, forget about it. Okay. But now the question is whether this is equal to that, or there's something else happening here. If it was just like that, life would have been simple thinking about diffusion, because that would mean that as time elapses, you're making more and more distance, right? In a what's known as proportional manner. But diffusion is kind of different, right? How does diffusion work? It's kind of like this thing that you go, and then you go back. Let's say if it's 1 dimensional, then you go back, and then you go, and you throw like a coin, and that's how you decide. And as you can imagine, when you do this, you don't get as far as if you're going proportionally, like in a constant velocity. And now you can do math around it, and you find out that really as a result, instead of this being equal to this, it's equal to the square root of this. Not a big deal, just a square root. Okay, so this is the equation for what's the distance as a function of time. And now let's see what are the implications of that.
The square root is for all dimensions? Or?
Yeah, it's crazy, independent of dimension. So it's really also super interesting that this whole thing of whether you're in 1 dimension, 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, n dimensions, it's always square root. The only thing that changes is this 6. And then it's also a question, how do you calculate D when you're in 1 dimension? It has a bit of a different meaning because density is a bit different and all sorts of things like that. Good. So I can start doing some work. Let's say if I have this, I can also, I know the distance already, right? I know the distance I want to go, R or L or whatever. And what I'm curious about is the temperature, is T, the time, right? So I can just take this, I can do T equals, and I just square this, it will be R squared divided by 6D. If I want to start and do some calculations, I'm still missing something, right? What is the value of D? What do you think? 10. Yeah, let's do 10. Yeah, so what are the units, right? That's super important. Yeah, so it's 10, and I think it's the micrometers square per second, right? Let's see if that, I think that's the units. Let's see if it makes sense. I don't remember anything almost by heart. This is units of micrometers squared. So if this is micrometers squared per second, micrometers squared, go. The 1 second you see would go up, it would be T. That's good, I remember it correctly. So we were working with these units of micrometers, right? And now we have a 1 centimeter long axon. So we need to go from this to that, right? So 1 centimeter, that's equal to 10 millimeters. Every millimeter is how many microns? Yeah, so it's 1,000, and therefore I have about 10 to the 4 micrometer. Good, I see some people smiling, they're already happy about, the result that's going to come out. Good. So R square, I need to plug in 10 to the 4 micrometers squared, divided by, again, 6, let's make it 4, times 10 micrometers squared per second. By the way, I'm keeping the 6, because actually even though to us it looks one-dimensional, for the protein, so this has a width. How much? A few microns, probably a few microns, not a micron, few microns. When you are a few microns and you're a protein, the world looks, infinite to you. You don't see any of the barriers. So you're just doing your random walk. It's true that when you reach the end, you hit and you go back, but it doesn't care so much about it. Okay, so it's really effectively, it looks like three-dimensional to it. Or you can, there's a cool trick they do in math, they look at diffusion at every different axis. So on this axis, it's anyway, it's complicated. Okay, so back to here. 10 to the 4 squared, so we have 10 to the 8 divided by 10 to the 2. Micrometer 2 seconds, so we have 10 to the 6 seconds. What can we do with 10 to the 6 seconds? So you remember how many seconds there are in a year?
Pi multiplied.
Yeah, pi 10 to the 7. That's how I like to think about it. It's very close to pi 10 to the 7. So like 3 10 to the 7, so that's 1 in 30 out of this. If I have 300 days in a year, divided by 30, it's 10 days. What do you think?
It can be random.
Well, could it be right?
Yes.
No.
Yes, but you use ATP to move.
That's we have to. Why not? Okay, so let's take it slow for a second. So you're giving a good point. The main function of the neuron is to pass an electric signal, and the electric signal is not what we dealt with. That's a different lecture to try to. Okay. At the same time, one could ask, in order to run these electric signals, you need to have some transporter here, right? You need to have on the membrane. There's also these things, channels that open and close, and all sorts of stuff like that. Where did the channel come from? Or it needs to, every time it needs to replace itself. Or there's all sorts of proteins here, right? I know there's sitting here in the top, in the synapse, there's all sorts of proteins. That's my friends in neuroscience telling me. These proteins have to come from somewhere. Where are they coming from?
The nucleus.
They're coming from the nuclei. So at some point, things have to move from here to here. Okay, yeah, but at least once they have to, at least once they have to come. Or at least, I think they continue to come.
And turnover can be really slow.
Yeah.
Don't have
It could be slow, yeah. There's also another thing that you could say, hey, maybe I don't need to move the protein. I could have, for example, I could have the ribosome sitting here, and just the ribosome making it like in situ, like where it's needed.
mRNA, which is bigger.
Nice. So yeah, so then you need to move the mRNA, and in contrast, when you need to move the mRNA, that's also another good point. You'll need to move less mRNAs, because from every mRNA you can make a lot of proteins, but you still need to move the mRNA that now you know is not a piece of cake, right? It's a heavy cake.
The worst problem is that if you need 10 days to move the protein or the mRNA, it will degrade before it gets there.
That could be another problem, that there's a problem of degradation. Okay, so what's the solution?
Active movement.
Right, so it doesn't move by diffusion. And there's these very cool movies, if you want to look at them on YouTube, of how, there's these things sitting on these roads, and they're like, myosin, no, not myosin.
Monoprotein.
Yeah, kinesin and dynein, etc. And they're like grabbing on whatever things they have on their head, like carrying as if they're carrying a bag, and they're taking the proteins with them, and they're walking, and people, spend years on whether they're walking this way or whether they're walking this way, also things like that. But there's a really beautiful, beautiful understanding of how mechanistically that happens, that they're able to move at the rate of, so they're moving at the rate of about 1 micrometer per second. That's the rate of molecular motors, the velocity. Is that fast?
Still quite a lot.
Right, so there's something interesting here, right? As you point out, we talked about it before for the bacteria, and there it took us just 10 milliseconds to cover a micron. So it was much faster by diffusion. So now I'm replacing this by something that goes almost like 100 times, or whatever it was, like 100 times slower, and still I'm happier, or my brain is happier. I think the key issue, which I think we brought to an interest, is this thing about, it's all sitting in the square root that we had before, which is all about like whether you're really directional or not. So diffusion at the microscopic scale is very, very fast, super fast. And therefore it could push you this 1 micron in milliseconds. And that solves many problems, like, it really enables the miracle of life to work. But when you need to go over longer distances, it slows down because of this square root. It doesn't sound like a big deal, but it turns out it is a big deal. That when the distance goes beyond, when it was 1 micron, okay, 10 microns, we already moved to a minute. When you want to move way more, 10 times more, 100 times more, it's all squared. And then it becomes so slow that it's just like wouldn't solve the problem. And then even if you're slow, but you're just directionally continuing, such that you're proportional with time, it becomes better. So you're 100 times worse in terms of rate for the short distance, but for the long distance, you are way, way faster. Okay, how much faster? Let's see. 1 micron per second, it means it will take you 1,000 seconds to make 1 millimeter, or 10,000 seconds. So 10,000 seconds in comparison to 1,000,000 seconds. Okay, so you start at 100 times more slowly, and you're going to finish 100 times earlier. How cool is that? I didn't even plan it. It's like really came out really elegant in terms of the numbers. Okay, you're starting 100 times more slowly for the 1 micron, and you're finishing 100 times faster in terms of reaching a centimeter.
Slow and steady.
Slow and steady. Okay, I think it's a good point to wish you a slow and steady week. Try to keep, moving forward at a good pace and get far.